Morning, afternoon, everyone. My name is Amber Budden. I am delighted that you've all chosen to spend your next 90 minutes with us talking about the educational materials that ESIP has developed. I'm going to do a little bit of kind of housekeeping before we get into the agenda proper. But I just wanted to take a moment to welcome everybody and to acknowledge you all and to remind people that, A, this meeting is being recorded, and that B, by being present here, we're agreeing to follow the community participation guidelines, which I believe you've all seen as part of the registration process. But as a reminder, they are here in the notes and linked there. Since we have a small group, I am going to take the opportunity to go around the room and ask everyone to just very, very briefly say your name. We don't have to give institutions necessarily, but what I'd really like to hear about is your connection to data science learning and your interest in being here in this session. And so in the spirit of kind of community awareness and listening to one another, I will start, but I will tag the next person, and I'd like for each of you to tag the next person to speak. I know that can get a little bit tricky, so maybe when you've spoken, you pop a little icon up in your window so that people can see that you've already spoken. So my name is Amber Budden. I have been chairing the Data Stewardship Committee at ESIP. I passed that beautiful responsibility across to Steve Diggs this year, but as part of that, I have been supporting this work in looking at the education materials, and really data science training or data science learning is something that I participate in my day job as well quite extensively. And with that, I am going to pass over to Jason Talent.
Hi, everybody. I'm Jason Talent. I'm at the University of Michigan Biological Station. I'm the data manager here, and used ESIP materials as well as NCs and data carpentry materials over the years to help train students, undergrads and graduate students. Those pesky PIs are a harder bunch though. And next, Stacey.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Hi, I'm Stacey Bully, and I do the data science training at Woods Hole Oceanographic. And I'm currently starting a new project. It's called an ExcelNet project funded by NSF, where I'll be doing data science training for an international group of early career researchers in the ocean sciences. So I've contributed some materials to the clearinghouse, and I've used materials as well. So I'm excited for learning more about what's available to me to use and today. Thanks.
And do you want to pass over to someone else?
I'm going to go to, let's see, Sahara. I don't know Sahara yet.
Okay, all right, thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Sahara Ali. I am a PhD student. My major is information systems. I'm at University of Maryland, Baltimore County, but specific to ESIP, I'm an ESIP community fellow for 2022. And I'm excited to learn a lot from all of you guys and all of the other sessions throughout the January meeting. Thank you so much. With that, I would pass it on to Alison.
Great. Hello, everyone. So I am our ESIP staff support today. I'm our communications manager here at ESIP. This is my first ever ESIP session, so I feel like this is a fantastic group to be with, and I enjoy being in community with you all. So I'm going to pass it over to Bob.
Hi, everybody. I'm Bob Downs, and I work at the Center for International Earth Science Information Network, which is part of the New Climate School at Columbia University. And there we operate the NASA Socioeconomic Data and Application Center, known as CDAC. And so I've been involved in developing learning modules that we're going to be talking about. So I'm kind of excited to be here and to see how things progress. And I'll pass it on to Nancy.
Okay, thanks, Bob. Hi, Nancy Hubel-Heinrich, Knowledge Motifs LLC. I've been involved with creating these modules as well that we're looking at, and also I'm editor and project coordinator Karl Benedict on the data management training clearinghouse. So been involved with this kind of data module creation and use, I guess you could say, for a long time, and also interested in helping to trainers and instructors to both reuse modules, but also create and keep the kind of the game going, because the whole area changes all the time too, with the data practices and so on. So I'm excited to be working here and actually getting to look at what we've done 10 years ago and see how and if we should improve them or move on. So let's see, Dave, do you want to go next? Dave Jones.
Hi, everybody. I'm Dave Jones with Storm Center Communications. It's good to be here. Sorry, I have way too many windows open on my computer, so turning my camera on took a little while. It's good to see everybody. Karl, hello. Good to see you. I wanted to come into this session. I'm the co-chair of the Disaster Lifecycle Cluster, and we are using, well, in our business, but also introducing within the Disaster Lifecycle Cluster, our real-time collaboration platform called GeoCollaborate. And we're starting to think about how we can not only share real-time data and remote sensing data with people across platforms in real time, but how can we link them to additional information about that data? How can we link them to learning more about how to use the data in particular contexts and things like that? So I must admit, I haven't left my chair to eat lunch, so I'm going to turn the computer up and probably make a sandwich while I'm listening, but I also look forward to participating. So thanks. Is that everybody? Do I need to pass it to someone else?
I think we still have Susan and Karl.
Susan, I choose Susan down the street.
Yeah, Dave is literally, if we shouted loud enough, we might be able to hear each other from each other's houses. There's a little bit of a highway in between, but actually, and also not very far from Sahara in Severna Park, Maryland, so not very far from Baltimore County. Susan Shingledecker, Executive Director. I think most all of you know me. I'm most excited about this session, just thinking about listening and hearing the needs of the group and how to advance and move training within ESIP and curation of training materials forward. In a past position I had many, many years ago, we offered one of the first open free online courses in the recreational boating industry, and we educate over 100,000 users for free every year. And so thinking about learning management systems and the evolution of content is really interesting to me, and I think an area we can dive into more. So just really want to hear from you all what you think you need, and then see how ESIP can support that.
Fantastic. Thanks, Susan.
And over to Karl.
And I guess that leaves me. So yes, I'm Karl Benedict. I'm at the University of New Mexico, where I direct our research data services and IT programs in our library. And yeah, I have curricular development and use in a number of areas. I'm a certified carpentries instructor right now, actually going through my carpentries instructor training and certification process, which is a new learning experience in all the meanings you might think. But as Nancy mentioned also, I'm working with her on an IMLS funded project as we're on the home stretch on enhancing the data management training clearinghouse for enhancing the discoverability and content in the clearinghouse. And so that's been a good opportunity. And once upon a time, long ago, I was using some of the originally developed curricular materials for some workshops that ESIP was organizing at AGU. So I have a very distant hands-on experience with these materials.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Karl. Thank you, everyone. So it sounds like we have a very experienced group with respect to thinking about data science training, if not a lot of experience with the modules themselves. Some people have extensive experience. They were part of the original builders of these materials, and some of us less extensive experience with either use them or new to them. So we're going to make sure that we're all on the same page as we go into the meeting, so that we have that shared understanding moving forward to help us identify the products and outcomes that would be beneficial to ESIP and ESIP community. And before we get into the main session per se, I did want to go through some logistics. So everyone should be seeing my screen, which is the Kiko chat. You also, this document, this Google document is available directly. I think Alison was putting some links. Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. So it's the same document. This is a collaborative space. Thank you all so much for popping in your names, affiliations, and pronouns, etc. at the beginning here. This format is going to be very familiar to you by the end of the week. Every session has one of these documents set up, and there are kind of sections to it. One of the things that I wanted to highlight is just some structuring within here to help you navigate. And we will visit this as we start to use the document more. But we do encourage collaborative note taking. And you'll see at the beginning we have the agenda, and I've noted that the note taking space is below. And we have these sections that have resources, and section here for session notes. And so it is one huge document. We're going to have some breakouts, and so further down is the section for the breakout notes. And to help everybody navigate, all of those sections are available within the header of each document, each page. So here you have the quick links to all of those pages. There's page breaks between them. So if ever you need to navigate, just go to your header, and you'll be able to find yourself back in the agenda, back at the resources, the main notes, and the breakout notes. One of the other things I wanted to point out within the resources section is we're going to be using a few slides to facilitate discussion and with question prompts. Those are available for you to look at, but we will screen share when we get into those. We also, as I mentioned, have the notes section for the breakouts. We will be going into breakouts later, and there's some breakout specific resources within this section. And so your breakout facilitator will navigate you back to those, but just to let you know, that's what that is within the resources section. So you don't have to worry about that right now. We can get into those details when we get into the breakout. If you have any trouble with this document or navigating yourself around, please do kind of either physically raise your hand, raise your little icon hand, or go ahead and pop a message in the chat. All right. And so with that, I'm going to go over to the presentation. Has it gone full screen for everybody? Okay, fantastic. All right, so welcome and introductions. We are going to be spending 19 minutes together. As I said, we are going to get everyone up to speed with the project thus far through some rationale, background, talking about the review process and the results of that process. And then we're going to go into some breakout groups. You'll be working for about half an hour with teams on specific questions, with the intention of when we come back for a facilitated discussion around the future directions, next steps, where ESIP can really be impactful in this space. We'll have had some direct hands-on understanding of the materials and the feedback that we have on the materials. And as I mentioned, I have been working on this project over the last year or so, but I was not part of the original team developing that. So it's absolutely appropriate, or more appropriate, for those that were involved from the outset to be able to talk about that. So I'm going to pass over to Bob, who will talk a little bit about the background of what we've been doing here.
Oh, great. Well, thank you very much, Amber. And so, yeah, I'll be talking a little bit first about the history, and then I'll be talking about the development process and the need for the review, and then the ESIP Data Stewardship Committee. Next slide, please, Amber. So, yeah, we do recognize that there is a need for these material to be updated, and more importantly, to be originally developed. There were really inconsistent practices amongst different disciplines and communities that were trying to prepare data. Often people were not sure of the roles involved in it, and And we still haven't resolved all these issues. I think we still have a long way to go. And it really underscores the need for these training materials. We also noticed that there were a lot of gaps in the knowledge. And we see that even continuing amongst not only the students who are just learning about this, but people who are just starting out their careers, and even senior researchers and scientists who've been doing this for decades. Things are changing all the time, and we're seeing it even more so with in the last couple of years, where we've really gone away from a paper-based environment and more to an online environment. And training needs to keep up with that and keep up with capabilities and instructions for making your data accessible online. So this project was sponsored originally by ESIP as well as NOAA, but some of the modules were also sponsored by the Data Conservancy project that was going on at the time. And we have the data management training cluster. It's basically short courses. The cluster really was very much engaged in development of these between 2011 and 2013. And there ended up being about 13 authors who were working on the original documents, or modules, I should say. Continue, please, Amber. We decided originally we wanted them to be freely accessible without any fees. And so the Creative Commons Attribution 3.0 license was selected for that. And this way, people, all they have to do really is to cite the modules, and they can use them in any way they want for any purpose, and anybody can use them. In terms of the formats for them, there's a landing page for each module, and each module is also cataloged and described in the metadata on that web page. And then we have PowerPoint slide presentations for each module, but also there's an audio and video recording of each module. People don't necessarily have to try to interpret what the slides mean. They can hear the narrative discussed during these audio and video recordings. And the modules were originally published around 2012 and 2013. And the editors were Ruth Duer and Nancy Holbe-Heinrich. And the publisher was the Federation of Earth Science Information Partners. And later on, each module was assigned a DOI, a Digital Object Identifier. So they are really persistent in terms of being accessible. Next slide, please, Amber. So the original modules, they were developed with some guidance materials. We had a template that we were using for the development of the modules, which basically included different categories and the kinds of issues that or items that you would want to include in a module. And there were author guidelines as well, which were really helpful, as well as review criteria. So there was this a call for contributors, and a lot of people joined the cluster. And during that time, we identified lots of different topics and they were really under a lot of different categories to address the instructional needs of the community. And everybody who was part of the cluster and others were invited to create modules and also invited to review modules. And then creating the modules included development of slides and a script. And the script was used for the narrative of the video recording, so that we would have these audio and video recordings for each of the modules. Then we also had a bunch of workshops where we presented the materials that were under development. And this way we were educating the community, but at the same time, we were getting insight into additional information that might be needed for the development of the course modules. So we ended up with 35 that were published, and 58 had been planned, but they were ended up in various stages of development without being completed. And they're stored on the ESIP Commons, as well as being accessible through various search mechanisms through the data management clearinghouse that Karl had mentioned previously. And that currently contains 545 metadata records, and more submissions are invited. There's a submission interface on the clearinghouse, so people can submit new learning modules. Next slide, please, Amber. So well, I should say these slides are now a decade old or so, and technology has changed. We are evolving how we're doing things, different approaches we're taking, and the tools that we're using are changing. And it might be that some of the older tools that we've been using are really even no longer applicable, where there's new approaches, new tools, and new ways of doing things. And so all of these need to be considered in terms of the review of these modules, so that we can get them not only current to today, but hopefully so that they will be relevant for at least the next decade or so, so that they will continue to be useful. Our next slide, please. Oh, that was it. And so I guess it's Nancy's turn next.
Actually, there's one more slide, Bob, for the data stewardship committee.
Yeah.
I was a bit heavy with my finger.
Yeah.
Accidentally.
Right, all right. Yeah, so originally the Data Stewardship Committee, it was really part of the Data Preservation Cluster, and that evolved and it became the Data Stewardship Committee. And it has adopted various different clusters to become part of it, because data stewardship is such a broad area. And as part of that effort, it really is the home committee for the data management training and short course cluster. The Data Stewardship Committee, though, has continued to serve as home, not only for that committee, but many other committees, and some have come and gone over the years. And these are initiated based on different ideas that the committee members recognize in terms of needs or interests. And then if others are interested, they can break out into a cluster and continue on as a cluster while the planned activities are being conducted. And at the same time, the Data Stewardship Committee ends up being the maintenance place for the dormant clusters. That is, they can come back into being again at any time once there's renewed interest, or new committees can start up. And so as part of that ongoing activity, we are now reviewing the short course modules. So I guess Nancy's next at this point.
I just wanted to mention we had a couple couple of questions that came up in chat, and so I thought it would be great to address those before we get into the review process.
Yeah, I was going to mention, I was going to discuss that, the one, Dave's question, the first one there as part of mine, if that's okay to start with that. And then, or did you want to do it differently, Amber?
No, go ahead. If
Okay.
That was great. I just wanted to make sure that they were noted.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So Dave asks the question about how these short courses differ from the RSET training short courses. I'm actually not familiar with the RSET short courses, but just to give you a background, what we decided to do at the beginning, the whole cluster decided to do was to base the modules on the Khan Academy approach, the KAHN, that academy approach to resources, training resources, which basically means that, they were from 7 to 10 or 7 to 12 minute short courses that kind of talked about very kind of distinct issues that could be, kind of built on each other, but also very focused on, a particular topic. And so that's the, when Bob mentioned that there were 58 planned, we had broken out into different kind of categories, case for data management, local data management, that sort of thing, and then had courses below that. So that was the thinking behind it. So hopefully that answers the question. The other question, I'm not sure. I guess that's maybe more for future. So should we, maybe we can talk about that after we go through the rest of the process? That's
absolutely. Stace, I think, had a follow-up.
Oh, okay, Stace.
Yeah, one other distinction is, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but I personally, at least, I consider the ESIP modules to be kind of foundational crossing domains, while again, personally, I consider the RSET training materials to be more targeted within a domain, for example, towards a particular tool. So like when I develop an ocean science specific training module, I would refer to an ESIP training module as the foundation, and I would extend that into the ocean sciences as a domain.
Yeah, that's great. That's a perfect explanation. What we were trying to do is provide some basic principles. And so part of the review process that we're going through is, are those basic principles still live and still active? So just to go into the review process then a little bit, I'll talk a little bit about the survey development. There are a couple of surveys that we developed in order to do this, the responses and the process by which we found potential reviewers, and then how the way that selection of reviewers. So next slide, please, Amber. So the first survey we did was to try to find reviewers of these modules, akin to what we did when they were first created. There was a peer review process that was part of the original modules, and this is kind of using that same concept to see what people think. We were looking for people who could really give a thoughtful and expert review, so they had some background on the topics generally, as well as the more specific ones. We are interested in increasing the diversity of participation in creating these kinds of resources, in evaluating these kinds of resources, in finding contributions. So interested in finding more people both within ESIP and outside ESIP who would be interested in participating, and then also engage new community members, bring new people into ESIP as well. We're always looking for recruits for ESIP. So that was part of the thought. And then also wanted to capture the breadth of data management expertise that exists in the especially the learning and teaching community. So that partly because, as we mentioned earlier, it's kind of a moving target in some ways. The best practices or practices change, tools change, and so on. And so it's very difficult to have a small group of people that can cover all of those. And so that's why we're interested in getting a wider breadth. And then provide transparency around ESIP funding for this. The funding originally came, as Bob mentioned, from NOAA and ESIP and Data Conservancy. And ESIP has given us a little bit to start with, and part of this, the function of this evaluation and this meeting is to see what plans would be to continue this process if it's these products, if it's something that's useful. So we had a survey, you can see a picture of it there, that just allowed people to express their interest with their name and some information about themselves if they wanted to. So a website or a bio or an ORCID. So we could find a little bit about them, their current position and so on, and areas of expertise, and then have them see which modules they'd be interested in reviewing. So that was the first survey. And then the next slide, please. Amber, the second survey then was to develop this review criteria. We had used, what we did was adapt the criteria for review from the original review criteria that Bob mentioned as part of the original work. We were looking to see whether the materials, the resources, the modules we have are still current, both in terms of the content itself and the examples that are used. See if people considered them appropriate for our target audience, which really were researchers of different levels along their career path. That whether the concepts themselves that are discussed in these modules have integrity, conceptual integrity, and whether the area of research that's being described is a stable area, so that in some ways as Stacey said, the modules would, and Bob said, the modules would continue to be used in the future if that or could continue to be expanded or extended. So the other recommendations that we are on this form are what to do, some suggestions about what to do with the modules themselves, with the categories of keep as is, keep but needs minor revisions such as typos or URLs that are no longer valid 404s, or the websites themselves have changed and the information is someplace else. Keep but needs major revisions. So if there's something that's really changed, note that. Deprecate as out of date. And then any other ideas people had about what could be done with the modules. So next slide, please. So we've gotten this is a colorful view of the number of responses we got, which was amazing. We had, as you can see, for each of these different modules, there were a number of people who were interested in reviewing them, from 12 to 26. You can look at this later if you're interested, but the response was really very, very positive. A lot of people felt that they could really help to evaluate the areas, and there were some that were had fewer people because they were a little bit more technical perhaps, or possibly the terms that were used were not necessarily as meaningful now as they were in 2012. I'm thinking of, for example, we had modules that were called advertising your data. And nowadays, some of the comments were that, we don't talk about advertising our data so much, it's more sharing or, making those kinds of resources available in a more open access. So because people didn't necessarily understand, the concept that was being used at that time, sometimes there were fewer people, but it was okay. We had good response, which was great. So next slide, please. So yeah, so basically we had an embarrassment of riches, an excellent group of people, respondents who are interested in reviewing. With the editorial team, meaning Amber, Bob, and myself, looked at the knowledge and background of the review applicants to the extent that we could from what they provided, and then chose reviewers with an emphasis placed upon the diversity of their experience, as well as perhaps the specialty that they have, if it matched what the modules were about. Some prior involvement with ESIP, but as I said, we were looking for people who were not as familiar and be interested in both working with us and broadening our view, and then available in the time frame. We wanted to make sure that we had the reviews in time to discuss it and move it forward in this for this meeting, this January meeting. So it was a great group, and thank you to everyone for the reviews. So I think Amber is going to talk about the actual results.
Yeah, absolutely. There was a comment from Stacey around some missing topics. So Nancy, do you want to speak to that in the context of the full 58? And then we can also talk about it in the context of the feedback we were getting from people as well. Yes, one of the things that we wanted to do way back when was to have two target audiences, really. One of them, the first one was the researchers, and the second was dedicated to data managers to help kind of move
that area along. And we just didn't get enough because this was all more or less volunteer in terms of people who created the modules. We could only take them forward when people were there to do it, and could actually follow through. A lot of people volunteered sometimes, on different topics, especially thinking related to preservation, related to even for researchers and other kinds of topics that we just, couldn't find the people to create. So we were glad for what we got, but we didn't do all that we really wanted to do at that time. And so that's one of the important questions for us now too, is are there gaps that we really should be including, either from other resources, because there have been a lot more tutorials and learning educational resources available throughout the world now than there were in 2012. So if people know of others that could kind of help fill gaps, assuming we can identify gaps, then that's part of what we're looking to do as well.
Yeah.
So hopefully that answers it.
I think this question is great as well for when we go into the larger discussion at the end. The examples that you gave, Stacey, and also FAIR. FAIR wasn't around when these were created, right. And so the idea of reproducibility, it's much more common language now. And then also the versioning of code. I think obviously technical software developers and engineers have been thinking about this for a long time, but now research practitioners or research scientists, it's much more part of their workflows, perhaps more so now than it was. So I think absolutely there are gaps, and that's something that we asked reviewers about, and something that we need to be thinking about. Okay, so just moving to talk about the review. So we heard about the review process. These are those modules that have been created. We grouped them according to kind of areas or sections. So we have data access and restrictions, part 1 and part 2, practical data management, metadata preservation, and data management plans. And so these kind of sections is how they had been organized initially. And so we clustered them in this way and identified reviewers. And we sent out reviewer requests to 9 individuals. And those people that we contacted were enthusiastic, really willing to conduct the reviews for us. And you'll see that we assigned reviews and received reviews within a section area. And one of the reasons for this is that the review asks whether there's overlap with other modules, for example. And so having that sense of the cohort of materials was important as part of the review process. We did have one email that didn't reach its target recipient, and so we split those reviews across some of the other reviewers. But everyone that responded was super enthusiastic. So if we take a look at just kind of looking at a final recommendation, the reviewer recommendation, minor revision, major revision, deprecate the review or integrate with another module, you'll see that the majority of materials are still considered to be quality standalone materials. There's only a case where a couple of them should be deprecated or integrated with another module. But then, there was a requirement for revision. And one of the things that we're going to take a look at with a subset of them is, to what extent does minor and major revision differ between reviewers? Different people have different definitions. We tried to provide some guidance on that. But we haven't yet gone into the reviews in detail to see whether a major revision is like a whole rewrite or just a couple of slides, because someone might consider a minor revision a couple of slides, whereas someone else might say a broken link, and that's a minor revision. If we look at it by subject area, if you recall, data access and restrictions 1 and 2, practical data management, metadata preservation, and DMPs, we have the diagonal hashed lines is the minor revision, the solid color is the major revision, vertical lines is deprecate, and the dots are integrate. You'll see that there's a mix. It's not consistent across all of the different subject areas. So there's work to do in all areas. It's not a case that one particular subject area, and data access and restrictions is one that's 100% minor revision. There's only 4 modules in that one. And so they all need some consideration, some more than others. Access and restrictions 1 and practical data management both seem to need major revisions. Data management plans, some areas deprecate. Data management planning was quite a new concept 10 years ago, not so much now. So it's perhaps not surprising that there's a recommendation that, you know, some of that material can go away. If we take a look at some of those question categories, Nancy didn't show it completely, but we had clusters of questions. We were asking about whether the reviewers thought the module was still current, whether it successfully addresses the target audience, whether there is conceptual integrity in the module, whether it is kind of visually compelling and engaging, and whether the module reflects a stable area of research, as in, you know, is this area changing, you know, daily, or is it pretty stable? And so we asked for specific comments and feedback in each of these areas, but we also, you know, gave them kind of categorically within the area, yes, no, maybe. And so this shows the breakdown of the yes, no, maybes across all modules for those questions. And you'll see that in the case of the module currency and the visual expression of concepts, that's where, you know, yes, we have 37%, or yes, 27%. That's where they're the lowest scoring. So, you know, it's not a surprise that the modules aren't still current. That's why we embarked on this process. But also they need to be updated visually. They're not very attractive. And again, our sense of design has evolved probably quite substantially. We've become more sophisticated. So we take a look at these two areas in particular in terms of module currency and visual elements, and break that down by those subject areas. Again, there is variation in the subject areas. And so, you know, in this case, we have high levels of currency for category 2, high levels of expression of concept for category 5, preservation, really low levels of visual expression of concepts for access and restrictions 1, and for practical metadata management. So some of this as well, because we clustered the reviewers within a subject area, some of it can reflect individual variation in the reviewers. One reviewer may have a very kind of highly particular sense of aesthetic design, and one less so, and we all encounter that with our colleagues and our collaborators. There's a lot of variation. Hopefully the currency is less subjective, because these individuals were selected based on their expertise, and so there is variation in currency as well. And so one of the things that we want to do as an editorial committee moving forward within data stewardship, but also on this call, is kind of dig a little deeper and understand the details within this. And so that's what we're going to do as part of our breakouts. Within the breakouts, we are going to be looking at the 3 sections, data access and restrictions 2, practical data management, and metadata. And before we get into the breakout groups, and these question prompts are available to us, I just wanted to articulate the goals of the breakout, and then I'll get into the logistics a little bit. So the goal is for all of us to understand the review process in a little bit more detail, so that we can better inform the conversation that we're going to have afterwards. And also understand the scope of the reviewer feedback. I've given you some information from the categorical responses, and we're interested in some of that more qualitative information that's contained in the reviews, understanding that. And just to note, we're not actually focused, this is in itself isn't a review process focused on the module. We're not reviewing the modules and their disposition, and we're not even evaluating the reviews. We're not kind of qualifying the reviewers, but we're just kind of understanding the content for the purpose of an informed conversation. So when we get into our breakouts, and these are copied within the notes, we have a couple of question prompts. You don't have to tackle them all. I know that in these breakout sessions, you always have less time than you feel you need. And so identifying a question that you want to look at and to discuss would be great. Some suggestions, looking at the breakdown and the categorization of the review content. In some places, people talked about areas that needed attention. Is there a pattern in that? And I kind of showed some patterns at a big scale, but we didn't look within the sections. As I mentioned, is there consistency between major and minor revision? Where there was, or was there crossover observed between modules? And was this observed? Do they emerge across the reviews? And so were people talking about a need for integration or crossover across modules? And then in terms of thinking about it as a set, I've given that high level, minor, major breakdown, but what would be the anticipated future effort? Looking at these as a set and considering all the reviews, is this a significant undertaking? Is it a brief undertaking to be able to get these up to the standard that the reviewers suggest? So this brings me back to our Kiko chat document, or our notes document. And this is where I wanted to point out in particular this section here. So these are the resources that you're going to need for your breakout. You're going to be assigned randomly to either access and restrictions, metadata, or practical data management. And I'm just going to show you what group 3 practical data management looks like here. These are the questions that were in the review. That's the beginning of each one. And then we have the reviews. We've taken out the personal information of the reviewer. But this is the pros of the reviews broken down here. If you are someone that is much more comfortable reading a spreadsheet, it's also linked right here, the review spreadsheet. And that is this document here. And you are welcome to take a look at that. And you have, again, in spreadsheet format. We have all 3 sections in the one spreadsheet. I haven't broken it down, so you'll have to look to see, for example, this is responsible data use, and data documentation is subject 4, so metadata. So you have your facilitator will guide you in those. And then underneath, this is where we have the notes to the breakout. And so again, that's all within this one document. It's just a matter of toggling yourself quickly within the page. Bob, Nancy, anything I've missed that we need to add?
Karl had a question about the degree of appropriate crossover from for context setting shared across modules. Not sure exactly what you mean by that. Some of the modules are kind of within broader categories, as I said, local, the way they were done in the first place. So local data management might have, modules underneath that are all related, or preservation, for instance, which we're not looking at right now, but there's a kind of a base module that is the broader categories, and then examples and use cases below that. But one of the last slides of each of the modules has references to other modules that are in the short courses. So in that sense, that's part of the idea of whether modules should be integrated with others within the short course or outside, if there are other modules or other kinds of resources outside that kind of would better support those main concepts. That's part of the idea. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I think that largely answers it. As I was thinking about, whether there's integration of content into modules that might be common across modules, or it sounds like the approach that has been adopted is one more of cross-referencing to other, either an introductory module or related modules.
Right. Yeah. So I mean, there's some are more kind of integrated, down within that whole system than others. So that's part of what you can tell to some extent by looking at the last one of those last 2 slides for each module.
Okay.
Yeah.
I see that we had a request to choose a module versus the random. I think our concern is that if everyone chose the same one. So I think as long as we have a reasonable distribution, we can pick our favorites. I think Allison is going to set us up as random. If you find yourself somewhere where you don't want to be, ping us and we can make a switch.
I can also change that really quick. It should be easy to do.
Okay. And so I think in the interest of time, let's set this for 20 minutes. And so then we have opportunity for 20 minutes of discussion when we come back.
Okay, so one quick question, Amber, in the slides you say breakouts 1, 2, and 3, but now they're 2, 3, 4. So are we just, so 2 is, for instance, what 1 was?
Well, 1, yeah, so they were the subject areas 2, 3, and 4. I was hoping the facilitators would be able to remember which.
Okay, all right. So it doesn't matter which one we go into as long as we're not all in the same one.
Oh no, Allison knows.
I've got you squared away.
No, I meant in terms of facilitators, but anyway.
Yeah, she's
Okay.
got that set up.
Great. All right.
All right, and just to double check that I do have all of you in the right room. Amber, which,
I'm practical data management group 3.
okay. And then Nancy, which group are you?
Access restrictions, I think.
Okay.
Right.
Great. Yep. Now you're all in the right spot then.
Okay.
All right.
Good
Thank-
luck.
Hey everyone, we're back. Possibly in the middle of a sentence, as was the case for Sahara.
Yeah, sorry, Sarah. Should hear more about that actually, but eventually.
I can put those things in the notes. Yeah, okay.
Fantastic, thank you. Okay, so I know that people didn't have a huge amount of time to have a conversation, but I think the experience of looking at the reviews and thinking about the content and the form of the reviews would be helpful for our questions and feedback. So I'm just going to share my screen again, just for these kind of closing thoughts or questions. So to put it into perspective, this review process is to obviously help inform the development of the modules and the refinement of the modules. And so there's a phase 2, and we need to think about what that phase 2 looks like now that we have this information. And obviously we're not going to get there in the next 8 minutes. This is something that's going to be ongoing within the Data Stewardship Committee and the Editorial Committee. But really there are kind of 2 big questions, like how can these modules better meet the needs of the ESIP community? And then how else can ESIP best support data management learning? Because these modules is one way in which we can support learning. Do we invest everything into these modules? Are there alternative methods that we should be thinking about? How else can we support the community? With respect explicitly, to the modules explicitly, you know, we've been talking about, we didn't know at the outset whether we needed to tweak a couple of modules and the rest were golden. So did we need an individual or a curricular-wide approach? What does that mean for budgets and brandings? And then also, do we want to be doing the same thing in 10 years' time? Is there a way, if we're having this opportunity to design or redesign or refine, that we can do it in a way that future-proofs a little bit better? And so those are kind of the questions and the thoughts that I would invite from all of you with respect to the modules and your understanding of the process that we've gone through and your reading of the reviews that you have done thus far. And so I welcome opinions from those of you that aren't active on the stewardship committee, because we can have this conversation again there. So I might pick on some people. Okay, Jason. Oh, Stace, you saved the day. You saved Jason. You raised your hand.
Oh, why not? I'll make a comment because my first question is always, is this the place, ESIP being this, is this the place where I would look for data training and why? And I think I could still answer yes. And the reason why is because ESIP crosses federal agencies and other research supporters, right? So like, it's not like, because there's Data One training modules, for example, right? But those tend to be more aligned with NSF type science. And then there was a comment earlier about some of the NASA specific training modules. So what makes ESIP different is that we cross all these different domains that work within earth science. And so it kind of is a place I would go to for the foundational resources. So in terms of future proofing, if the resources are that, if they're foundational, such that the examples used could be switched out, right? So the examples could be timely and relevant, and they could be switched out in 5 years. I'm never going to say 10 years because 10 years is like too long. But I still feel that this is the right place to have the foundation that is built upon by the examples that are used.
Yeah, and in the reviews we were looking at, one of the recommendations for future proofing is rather than list within the module itself individual standards, point to a community resource that they're maintaining lists of information and standards so that you're not having to update it yourself. And that community resource is a stable resource that's managed by a group of people. That's in line with what you were saying about examples that can be switched out.
So in that respect, you know, thinking, I guess there's a balancing point between specificity in the training modules and generality, because if we have, you know, essentially those separate references or separate resource listings, that implies that I think appropriately that there's a changing landscape. So then we have to think about what goes into the module that is, you know, how level do we pitch the concepts that are being taught as they exist within that changing landscape of standards or specifications? Because we could unfortunately find ourselves in a position where they're so general and generic that they're less informative or less actionable, maybe would be the better way to think about it. So I think that would be something we'd have to think about in terms of that specificity versus generality, because with specificity comes, I think, probably more actionable guidance and practice.
Bob, you're muted. Bob, you're muted.
Oh, gee, I don't know how that happened. It seems that if we could identify the content that could be more timely or timeless, I think, that is, that would survive and be sustainable over a long period of time, that is, shoot for 10 years or more, without being too general, as Karl was saying, so that there could be actions on it, then there would be less need to go back and, or it wouldn't be as frequent need to go back and update the particular modules, and perhaps have the information that is like current in the centralized resources, so that those centralized resources could all be managed. And if something's no longer current, you know, even have a category for like older resources or something, if the links aren't broken.
Any other?
Yeah. And actually, I was just starting to type this in the chat, but it may be easier to say, possibly adopting some sort of standardized structure in which we sort of identify the evergreen components, which may be sort of the motivation and the high level principles. And those could be two standard sections that are designed to be long lasting. And then there's sort of an implementation or practice component that is recognized as the one that's going to have to evolve as standards and tools and practices evolve within that more stable space for needs.
Yeah.
Karl, I'd like to second that. I think, I mean, in our projects, we've been discussing training a lot during the last years, actually. And it turns out that depending on where you come from and what kind of problems you have, the focus and the view of training is very, very different. And so whether you're a data steward that deals with reviewing and curating data every day, or whether you run a repository is a very different angle. What I can tell you is that we are currently changing towards a more solution-orientated training, where we pick solutions that others have done and basically show how they can be implemented and what kind of rules we follow. in order to how to say, follow guidelines that ESIP or RDA or whoever has issued. So that's our current strategy, and I've seen only very few training modules that do actually deal with real solutions, as Karl said, implementations of something that has been recommended. Because many people are hesitant because they don't know whether whatever they implement is still valid tomorrow. And I think we have to give some confidence to the people that they're doing the right thing. And this comes through the training modules. Sorry, this is getting a little bit big, but many of the modules, they try to solve something small where we're actually heading for something big.
And it could be that those implementation modules, there could be multiple modules associated with those higher level introductory materials. That's sort of the approach we've tried to take with our coffee and code workshops, where we have a fairly standardized introduction and high level concepts. And then we have the second half is hands-on, live coding around a particular problem that illustrates that. And when you're dealing with disciplinary variations or different tools or different standards, you can plug in those different implementations still within the larger tent supported by the introductory materials that you have.
Right. But this is really, really tough take. I mean, this is not easy, because in particular, finding good good implementation practices is so tough. Because nobody wants to, stick their head out and say, this is the right way to go, because they're all very careful, it seems.
Well, I want to respect everyone's time. It's a very busy day of activities at ESIP. So I want to thank everyone for their contributions. Obviously, more work and discussion is needed. We will be continuing this activity through the work within the Data Stewardship Committee. And so I encourage everybody to join the email list, whether or not you can attend these specific meeting times for the Stewardship Committee, because we'll probably be meeting at ad hoc times to focus on the modules. And so we invite your participation to help us kind of figure this out and move the ESIP learning materials forward.
Thank you very much, everyone. Very helpful.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Amber.